Okay. I'm going to open the November 15th, 2021 meeting of the Fairport Industrial Development Agency and open the public comment portion of the meeting. If there's anyone that would like to speak in the public comment. Hearing no one and seeing one, I'll close that section. We have two different meeting minutes to approve, starting with the September 20th meeting minutes. And attendance for that one was Ken, Donna, and Leslie. And if we don't have Donna, we cannot approve that. So we're going to have to table that one again. Moving on to the October 18th meeting minutes. Did not have Donna, but everyone else was in attendance for that. So can I have a motion to approve those minutes?
So moved.
Second.
Any comments, corrections, or discussion regarding the October 18th minutes? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, moving on to financial reports, resolution 2021-11, authorizing payment of the IDA bills.
Having reviewed the bills in detail, I move payment of the bills. Second.
Any questions or discussion on any of those bills? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Do a review of the cash and investments. We've got those to take a look at. Anything you want to call out on any of that, Martha?
No, not this month. No.
I did have a phone call with Megan today, and so she has the information she needs to transfer the accounts.
Right. That's, as the board remembers, we're moving from an advisory account to a brokerage account. So we had to fill out additional paperwork for that.
Hope she's confidential. I could give her some confidential information. So then moving on to the Tompkins investment account. Anything there?
I will only say that I reviewed the investments, all are within the confines of our investment policy.
And the P&L and just the P&L this month.
Right. The P&L we had a not you. Okay. You'll see that we had those repairs and maintenance for the butterfly garden and the North Main parking lot, and that was unbudgeted. So that contributes to the loss you see that month. To my mind, we had established the capital reserve policy, but in my mind, that's for something, a project coming up, not for this particular thing. So that's why I didn't charge it off against the capital reserve. We're just expensing it. That's something as if we were going to redo the boardwalk, for example, at Thomas Creek or something. So a major project rather than a reclamation of an old project. So
Do you see any need to amend the budget given that?
no, I think variances are fine as long as they're explainable.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And that one certainly is.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else on financials? Anybody have any questions on the board? Anything? Okay. Guess we'll move on to the old business. And we can welcome Jared Shepard of MRB here. We received a memo on the update, the early things that they've done. They're just getting rolling here, getting to know us and getting to know our village. So we have a memo of what he said. So Jared, you probably want to fill in the blanks for us. And Martha, if you want to introduce and preface anything.
Right. Jared and I met today for lunch at Fairport, and then I took Jared on a whirlwind tour of the village of Fairport. And we actually had a very productive discussion with Doug Calabrese and Cameron Pennington on site at their property on the
Was that
canal.
arranged or
Yeah.
was that happen?
You know what? Doug was on our list of an interviewee,
Yeah.
and Doug preferred to meet in person. So I think it was really helpful for Jared to get to meet him in person, and we had a good long discussion with Cam and Doug. So, and then I did take Jared through a lot of the village, the Northwest Bank, the Southwest Bank, Thomas Creek, pointing out, opportunities, issues, those types of things. But I'd love to hear his impression of the day and where we are.
Sure, where would be an appropriate?
Fine.
Is this fine?
Yes.
Okay,
Mhm.
sorry,
Yeah.
I don't know if it's, sure. I can see that.
Yeah.
So, just to kind of introduce myself. So, and certainly I'm looking forward to more questions or any communication I have throughout the process. Welcome. So my background is in public policy and economic development, and I've worked as a municipal consultant, mostly in upstate New York, with villages and towns of similar size. And I've been working at MRB, doing both planning and economic development roles since August. And prior to that, I came over from Center State CEO, which is a large economic development strategy organization in Central New York. So though I have plenty of experience, a lot of my interest in thinking is around economic development issues. So, and then part of our approach, as I understand it, I was a part of writing the proposal to respond to your request, is to build off of the studies, the existing surveys that you have. There was a little bit of additional research that we've conducted some of, which I'll update you on. But really part of our emphasis as a firm in the consulting we do is to move things towards practicality in implementation and address questions and problem solving through the lens of things we can do. What are the levers that we can actually affect? What level of information is needed for decisions and who the decision makers are. So fitting into the process that we have here, one of the things that I'm focused on, at least initially, is a lot of things from the studies, but one of them is taking the SWOT analysis, which I think you've all been a part of, and trying to move that more out of an inventory to an analysis that is sort of rooted in the idea that given whatever the condition is, external or internal condition, in the village's ability to do the following kinds of things, right? Like your strengths, this is what we recommend as an action. So to pursue that line of thinking, our interviews and our research sort of inform that, like getting to those decision points that we will be making part of our recommendations in our report. So at this point, the update for the work is that we've reviewed all of the materials that have been made available to us. Spent some time having that guide some initial research. And then we thought it was very important to go to some data sources for real estate research and get a better sense of both the supply and the demand side of the real estate market, and that's what the memo covers. So that's sort of a starting point for us, and it brings up a few questions. One of them we reviewed today, which was the surprising reverse trend in the greater Rochester metro area on vacancies in office space. So at a time when we saw that vacancies going up, it was going in the other direction. There's a lot of that leads to more questions about how to verify that data, but I think it's actually a compelling place to start in the broader picture of an economic development opportunity or a plan that includes development of some business services, employment, and industry that fits into other aspects of this being a place-making community, of there being tremendous walkability, and of population attraction to go with it. And then, of course, all these things are networked together, and that's where also development of retail and other services can grow. And I've had 2 interviews. So as Mark mentioned, spoke with Doug today and one of his associates, Cameron, and that provided some great insight and some on-the-ground information. And I had an interview with Jennifer Townsend at the end of last week, and that was terrific as well. And I have one interview scheduled for this week. But yeah, Martha and I already spoke about some ideas around what we see already. One of the approaches that I like to doing problem solving type of work is to actually think of like a 1-week solution. Now that's not usually going to get you everything that you need, but it's a good place to start to sort of understand what you know already, see where that's pointing, and then sort of point to some other places where if you had more information, how that might affect it, so you can have some other ideas of where to look. But I think even already there's emerging some things that I don't expect to change throughout the process. One of them is as we were talking about, the assets, the amenities that the community already has. So a lot of the questions I think revolve around making best use of those things. There aren't major structural issues going on. There's always challenges, but I think we're more directed towards building off of the assets that the community has. There's appetite for development, and developers are engaging. And the developers are actually also being very positive, but upfront already about things that would improve the way that they do their work. And the key thing is these are doable things on a short and mid-term. These are small scale things that you can start doing. It doesn't have to be major long-term visions. Though vision is important. So those things are emerging, and I think that's really exciting. So we have some more interviews to go. We'll start putting that information together, and this is actually a pretty quick process. I think our timeline concludes, if I remember, it's in December or January.
January.
So yeah.
So, Jared, can you tell us about those interviews and how that goes? Do you go in with a set of questions or that you're trying to get information out of,
Yeah.
or is it more in generalities, a little more free flowing?
Sure.
Because the people you're talking to are going to be different, but a lot of similarities.
Absolutely, yeah. So I actually made a decision in this case. So sometimes I would go into these types of interviews with almost like a stock set of questions. And that's still something that could really be applicable. It's more like a survey in a sense, but the interview part makes it richer. In this case, actually, when I had the opportunity to speak with Jennifer, before we began, I sort of told her where I was in the process, which was still trying to understand what the actual questions are. So it was a little bit more free form, but it was really based around asking her, first of all, knowing what we're trying to do, what would you think would be helpful to be aware of? What's on the top of your mind? But then helping me do some inventorying of, where do you think, as a developer, the village has strengths? What in this market is strong? What in the village administration and the infrastructure and the education? What's strong? So that sort of built out some questions. And then on the other side of it, what are the major challenges? Tried to get to sort of some definition on those challenges and trying to say, like, which of these challenges, if not resolved, are really going to be inhibiting of the growth that you expect, to try and get to the sort of the necessity and the sufficiency of some of these conditions. What other questions would you ask if you were in my position? And then finally, just how optimistic are you about all these plans and visions coming together? How positive are you about the future? Now, I know that's sort of like tipping the scales a little bit to phrase it in that way, but I think it's actually a way to finish off, because I think in general, if people are pessimistic about it, they'll probably respond. I would expect they would push back at that point. But I do want to get a sense of not just the details of what you're doing and seeing and the sort of researching type questions, but also just how do you feel about this? And in general, if they're doing business and development, they feel positive, and I think that's good to get on there, start to find out why.
You know who Jennifer Townsend is?
I sure do.
Oh, okay.
Sure do. Yeah, chatted with her last week. I'm curious. Did anything surprise you from the interviews you've had? What you've heard from the folks you've met with so far? Did anything jump out at you so far?
The first thing that jumps out to me is actually to look for notable places of consistency. So in particularly early on in like the research project process, and this sort of goes to your question. Eventually, what I think of as getting to a point of research is when there's a saturation of ideas. So you're hearing the same things over and over again, and then you can sort of test for how many people. Like you could almost go get statistical tests of that. But what surprised me so far was that between two interviews with two people with fairly different points of view in terms of the markets they're in, their approach to development, some consistency in both the opportunities and the challenges. Maybe there's some subtleties in how they're articulating it or precisely what they see it as, but it was good to see that that even across, I think, fairly different points of view, there was a consistency there. Now, with the follow-up interviews, I think we'll do two more to kind of establish the ideas, the themes, and the content. Then the four after that, I'll if there's some collection of themes and ideas, I might change the interviews somewhat at that point to more or less test for those ideas, and see if there's consistency and see if the group that we didn't talk to has a similar point of view. If things start to diverge, it could lead to another. Maybe you'd want a couple more interviews, or maybe you'd want a short survey, or you look someplace in the data just to verify what you're saying. But that's pretty early. I mean, I didn't hear any ideas or expectations that felt like they were going to out of the blue or something. But the early consistency was kind of interesting.
Two things. In the memo, you mentioned retail vacancies says 2 to 4%. Is that believable? Or are you going to test that in some way? That seems awfully low.
Yeah, I think the Connor, who's one of our economic analysts, wanted to re-examine a couple of the data points. Wondering, so the data comes from CoStar, and they're pretty comprehensive with what they gather, but there could be an issue with that data categorization. So yeah, the first cut of data is going to help us lead. And thank you for bringing it up, because that's part of the process is, we pull numbers out, and sometimes frequently the best way to figure out if they're real or not is have questions and comments instead of
The other thing I listened about was resources. How do you feel about, and how will you address the railroad crossing in the village? And it's
in terms
We're going to
of,
build a bridge, aren't we?
Yeah. Some
at one
ideas
point
have
there
already,
was an idea, years and years ago.
some ideas have emerged already. I think that's it. I haven't. Well, it's come up in one of our interviews.
Let me guess. Right there.
And there's other communities to look to that have a similar feature in their downtown area. I was really pleased to see that it's been embraced, and that there's a platform for rail observation. That's very good thinking.
That's pretty new too.
Yeah.
And well used.
Yeah. Prior to that, I'm guessing people set up lawn chairs maybe. And, yeah.
And coolers.
Recliners, yeah.
and coolers.
Okay. Yeah, but the challenge though, I'm guessing that you're talking about is if the train is there and getting people having accessibility and walkability.
Thank you. Jerry, curious too. So was today your first time getting the tour through Fairport? You spent much time in the village here prior to today?
I visited before, visiting a friend of mine who lives here. But yeah, today was my first thorough tour.
So considering that, kind of today as your first blush with the planning in mind,
Yes.
at least. Although you may not be able to turn that off when you're just visiting places that you visit, I'm sure. Thoughts that jumped out of you, your initial, having seen some research prior.
Yeah.
When you were touring the place with Martha today with more of a critical eye, did anything jump out at you either opportunity-wise or anything that made you think of, hey, we've done this in a similar locale that worked really well, we should try that here?
Yeah. Well, I think the Bank of America building is a huge opportunity. In terms of the where it is in the village, the parking nearby. So as far as a specific instance, in general, the community looks a lot like a number of communities that are very successful with a place-making, walkable community where you can be very successful doing like real mixed-use development of office and residential and retail. There's a big question, I think, all over on the national scale of how work in office and how commercial real estate is tied into the changes in demand with fewer people working in offices, and we have major vacancies in office parks, in particular in large office parks. I don't know that anyone quite knows how that actually will have an impact in a community like this. I think it's reasonable to even think of it as feeding into it. I mean, it's a question worth looking into, particularly because it plays into your hand for like the assets you have of housing nearby. Though I think affordable housing is an issue here as it is probably just about everywhere. But certainly, so I work in just anecdotally, I work in an office park near Syracuse. I'm probably in a 30,000 square foot building, maybe larger. I think on a busy day, there's 5 people in the entire building. Pretty inefficient, and also pretty uninteresting for me to work there. But that's how it works. If there's some migration out of those types of facilities where now we don't need all of the office space maybe we needed before. Actually, there's more demand for smaller spaces, and the people who want those jobs would prefer to work in such a space. I mean, I know that I would prefer to work in an office in Fairport where I could walk. That's a great quality of life. So I think there's some interesting questions about how that could fit in. But I think in general, being in the community, there's a couple that sort of jump to mind as highly successful versions. I think there's a lot of differences in terms of the economy and the tourism that Saratoga Springs has. But that's a place where there's a lot of mixed use office, residential, retail, restaurants, and you can see how that could work here. So I think some of the analysis on what's going on with office real estate would be a key thing to keep track of it, and try and get a good frame around whether or not part of the plan would include finding places where professional and business services that would be an integral part of a larger greater Rochester metro economy, which I've worked on for other communities out here. So and I'm familiar with REDC development stuff. So in Rochester has some of the most successful industry clusters, particularly around imaging and optics, as you know. I think opportunities to build off of that and have like a really desirable placemaking spot for work and retail could really jump out. I think you can kind of see that just from walking around. So.
Leslie, anything?
No, I was thinking about the retail figures 2 to 4%, which jumped out at me too, so potentially something like that. But I like what I'm hearing.
Yeah, and the key thing on the data that I'll follow up on is what the vacancy rate is being calculated on. It may be leaving out a lot of square footage that makes that vacancy number so low.
We're joined by Mayor Domeritz in our meeting. She and I actually have met recently and talked about his plan as we're going forward and making sure that we're consistent, with the village comprehensive plan and the work that we're doing. So we're on the same page moving forward. And, I'm comfortable that we are and the like. So I don't know, Julie, is there anything that you'd like to talk to us about or bring up or ask Jared or anything?
I was curious to hear what some of the initial feedback was that you got from some of your meetings. I think that from our perspective, as we're working through the comprehensive plan, we have a bigger focus on looking at the residential side of things, but seeing a lot of opportunity in the space of mixed use, in that today in our future land use map, it shows 2 categories of mixed use. One is really your commercial districts and commercial corridors, and the second are the outlying areas, which are considered to be mixed use, where you're doing the mix of housing and possibly retail, or less likely to be restaurants, but office space. So those kinds of mixes, and I think there's a lot of opportunities in this Main Street corridor, the Canal corridor, for additional types of those types of developments.
Okay.
It was loud and clear in a lot of comments that we heard from the village that while there was a big push like make more mixed use, there was a big push that residents of this community are very concerned about their neighborhoods, keeping their neighborhoods and the housing market separate from this development corridor.
Okay.
There's a lot of concern about seeing that mixed use in the residential space become too commercial.
Martha and I had a Zoom conversation this morning with the soon-to-be new owners of the Packett's Landing area, and one of the questions that was asked of them was, have you looked at the opportunity for converting any of that property into residential for mixed use? And it kind of goes, what you're saying, keeping it out of the neighborhoods, but having a more central, people moving downtown Fairport, like some of us, downtowners now. But having that opportunity here, and they said that yes, that they early on in their discussions they thought about that, and they're not committing to anything obviously at this point, but they said it's something that's not off the table. And that kind of goes against Jared, what you're talking about, of those people that want to live, work, and play, in the same area and be within that corridor. That you walk down and go to work, it's almost like working from home, except that you can go to lunch, and have somebody serve you.
There are the people who can't see anything beyond, I live in a single family, or maybe a neighborhood that's got some duplexes and, but primarily single family, truly residential. And there's some challenges with local residents being able to understand. There are places that work out just fine with a restaurant here and another building that's got something else on the first floor and residential above. I use the example, we have a studio apartment in Cohoes outside of Albany because my husband works there part of the time. We live in an industrial building right on the main street, and below us is a dance studio, and next door is the Monocle restaurant, and I think it's a great place to go when the dance studio is not in full blast because
At least they're not above you. They said at least the dance studio is
no,
not
it's not.
above you.
We're on the upper floor, but it's a really interesting place to be a resident with so much so close that you can walk out your front door and walk down the street and you're at the bakery. And I think from a residential perspective in this community, people just aren't familiar or as used to so much of that living and working in the same places like that and having a bakery, or we're in a larger metropolitan area, you see so much more of that. We're just not, this village is just not used to it. It's not to say that it doesn't fit here. I think it fits here. And I think that there's a lot of people who want to be able to live and walk to work in the same community. And I think it's going to draw younger people into this community, which is, you know, you're looking to renew your tax base.
Yes.
And they just, you know, some of the older residents just are not familiar with that type of a lifestyle.
Right.
But I think there's a great place for it in this community. Sorry, I don't want to take over your conversation at all.
No, that's good. Glad you added. Do we have anything else for Jared? You and Martha, anything that you want to close on next steps or
Right.
where we're going next?
Well, Jared has another interview scheduled, I think, with Joel Barrett. We're trying to firm up with Matt Lester. As you recall, we're going to have our work session on November 30th, and that'll be at the land on Main, or Main and Vine. A really intensive work session. We can expect to have preliminary information and data for the work group a week or so prior to that.
Yes.
That'll generate hopefully a lot of questions, a lot of input from the work group. And then the plan would be following the work group, we'd get the draft, there'd be a public presentation of the draft, and then we go to final in December, is it, or January? January is final. So it's a pretty intensive process, but that's why we picked the work group that we did, because we've got people that bring their ideas and thoughts to the table and are going to be actively involved in it. As you recall, it's our Leslie and Kevin are the two board members, myself, Deb Fuller being the contact for planning and zoning. You know, I'm sorry? Emily Mishler, the village trustee, the liaison to the IDA board. Peter Vars from BME, also heavily involved in a lot of the development that's gone on here in the village, and you know, business owner in the village for a long time. And Jim Bellata, the Chamber of Commerce president and banker, commercial banker. So it's a really good group, and we're going to work you really hard that night, right, Jared?
Oh, I have some ideas.
And but then we'll have a nice dinner afterwards. So hope to see you all there.
That's the one you really have to worry.
Oh, and actually, we do have biweekly calls set up. And on Wednesday, for my next call, I'm actually going to Geneva to meet with Matt Horn. He's part of the MRB team, and then we're going to spend the afternoon in Geneva and see a lot of the things that have happened down in Geneva. So I'm really looking forward to that as well.
Jared, will most of your work be done from Syracuse, or will you be here periodically as well?
I do most of my work in Syracuse, but I also am in our Rochester office. You know, not quite once a week, but from time to time. So it makes it easy for me to come here as needed or if requested. But if I'm working in the Rochester office, I can check in.
it was a whirlwind this afternoon. I think you'd agree, right? So I think when he gets back and checks his notes, I imagine there'll be a lot more questions. So we'll be in touch and,
Yeah.
And Julie reminded me that Matt Horn, who is the partner, one of the team, he did some facilitating of the village board's work. Jeff, what was it, Julie? A
We had
workshop,
retreat back
a
in-
retreat. So yeah,
Seems like.
so he's familiar in that regard with with Fairport. Has done some work with the village board. So.
Thanks for your work.
Okay. Anything else?
I'm good.
All right. No. Thanks, Jared. Thanks for coming.
Thank
in.
you.
Appreciate it. So, any other business for the IDA that anyone has? Martha,
I do not have anything.
anyone on the board? Okay, I'll take a motion to adjourn the IDA meeting.
So moved.
Second?
Leslie second.
Oh, I'm sorry. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. We are going to,
right.
no reason not to go.